Welcome everyone to the Central European Affairs Talk podcast. My name is Balázs Csekő, and in this episode we're going to talk about liquid democracy. Our guest today is Vladan Lausevic, a social entrepreneur from Stockholm, Sweden. He works for Syntropy, a Stockholm-based think tank advocating for liquid democracy. The daily work of Syntropy consists of maintaining the liquid democratic platform and community called CrowdPoll. He's a member of Democracy Without Borders, an NGO promoting World Parliament. Vladan, thank you very much for accepting our invitation and being here today on our show. So, as I've just mentioned it, we're going to talk about liquid democracy. So the name itself might sound maybe a little bit strange for many persons. Actually, liquid democracy has been here for several years. Please explain us what is liquid democracy and how does it work?
So thank you very much for this opportunity, and thank you everyone who is listening to this podcast at the moment. So the interesting thing with liquid democracy, if I usually explain it as a mixture or a hybrid between representative and direct democracy, it's actually more or less, let's say, around 50 years old. So the idea came up during the end of 1960s. There was a academic. He was, let's say, like a political scientist called James Miller, and he didn't use this term, liquid democracy, but he did wrote that like the need for a new kind of democracy where individuals can, how to say, delegate. Yeah, he emphasized on voting delegation, like delegate their votes to different experts in different policy areas, like regarding different problems, topics in the society. And this is how how the idea started. And he also argued that this kind of democracy would also be, how to say, more efficient than the representative democracy, because it could mobilize higher amounts of knowledge and expertise, so that individuals could, how to say, by delegating their votes, they could also achieve better decision making.
So it's actually a mixture of representative democracy and direct democracy, right?
Exactly, because if you look, let's say, on the the early kind of democracy, if you speak about the Hellenic Greece, or during antiquity, or we speak about Athens as a city-state. So that was the example of direct democracy. Citizens, they would meet on the agora, and they have a discussion, then have a vote, and make decisions. And this kind of democracy still exists, like in terms of popular referendums, like in Switzerland, on especially like on the local, like on the cantonal levels. And then you have the representative democracy that, how to say, became basically a norm since the French and American revolutions, like at the end of the 18th century. And now we speak about parliaments and national assemblies, and and similar. So what liquid democracy does is basically to to mix, or let's say to have one part from direct democracy, second part from the representative, so that you as an individual, as a citizen, you could actually be able to vote on different topics in different policy areas, daily, weekly, monthly, instead of, let's say, voting only like every 4 or 5 years, as when we speak about general elections in the sense of representative democracy.
And how would this look like in the year 2021? So does it mean that we should go every week to the polling station and to cast our votes on every little tiny issue, or how does this work?
Well, when we speak about liquid democracy, it is existing at the moment, but it's not existing on a, let's say, large scale, let's say, for example, a national level. Liquid democracy only exists basically in kind of online based communities, in certain networks, in certain political parties, as let's say the Pirate Party in Germany. So you can say that liquid democracy is still very it's subculture. So it's not, let's say, established as institutionally established as the representative democracy, where we have parliaments and assemblies, or even the European Parliament. So one idea of liquid democracy is basically to apply modern technology in order to, let's say, digitalize and improve the current democratic system. Because the idea is not that you should go physically, every day, every week to your polling station, like in a municipality or your city. But the idea is more that you can actually sit at home and even use, on your smartphone, and still have to say be able to delegate your votes to different individuals, different organizations that you admire, you like, because of, let's say, their skills or knowledge or agenda and so on. And that's a little bit what the crowd poll, the platform that Syntropy is creating, is trying to establish. That basically, people should be able to make an impact, make a difference, especially on the local level, even by just using their smartphones.
And don't you think there are risks for, let's put it this way, digital democracy? Because basically it would be digital democracy, right? So you have the smartphone in your hand, and that's how you can cast your votes. But for example, there's also the chance that certain governments just shut down the electricity. That's what at least the critics say. What do you think about this?
It's a problem. I'm in favor of democracy, and to be honest, I really hate governments that distrust governments that are having such kind of behaviors. Like, for example, if you take Uganda, the Ugandan government with President Museveni did this recently, only 1 month ago during the elections, because the government in Uganda shut down, had like internet blackout. They cut down the social media and so on, in order to prevent the opposition from, let's say, achieving better results or even winning the elections. Now, in my, let's say, more, not to say, let's say, ideal society, but let's say more optimal society, my position is that liquid democracy goes, hand in hand with both, let's say, technical and economic and institutional decentralization. So this means, for example, that in the future, we as individuals, we should have access to decentralized internet, decentralized energy, decentralized more or less everything, meaning that the infrastructure is controlled by us as individuals in different communities, and not by public institutions or governments. But this is, of course, this is not how things are at the moment. But at the same time, this is what I would say me and my colleagues are in favor of a, let's say, more radical change, where the current technologic trends, if you speak about robotization, artificial intelligence, digitalization, could actually empower us as humans. Because in my opinion, there is going to be a very big political struggle between digital democracy and digital dictatorship, as we can, for example, see in China.
Should we just eliminate national governments, national states? Is this the goal of this type of democracy?
It's this is a very, how to say, this is a very big theoretical and, let's say, a meta question, which I do like. I do like these kind of questions. So I usually say like this, that even on a united world planet, everybody has a democracy, there is world peace, there is some kind of global citizenship. Even on a united world planet, there are still gonna still, let's say, cities, regions, countries or nations are going to exist, and there is gonna be a lot of space for both, let's say, local patriotism and regional patriotism, and how to say country, patriotism in that sense, and world patriotism at the same time. And so even on a united world planet, there's going to be some kind of federalism. Some decisions are going to be made on the global level. Some are going to be made more locally or regionally or nationally, or let's say at the European level, and so on. So for me, it's more like a question of, let's say, technicality and how we as humans can make agreements. Now, regarding, let's say, the World Parliament, the ideas behind there are a little bit different ideas behind it, but I would say in general, here, let's say, the European Parliament is used as a model, as an inspiration. And as you know, the European Parliament is, let's say, not replacing local or national or regional parliaments in all topics, all discussions or all decisions. And if you speak now about technology, I would say that, technologically seen, this idea of a world parliament is closer to us as humans more than ever in our history. If you take, for example, the idea of the European Parliament, the first ideas came up already, like, let's say, a end of 16th century, and most people at the time were thinking, it's unrealistic, it's never going to happen, So it took like almost 400 years, for the European Parliament to be created from the idea to, let's say, an institution. Now, the idea of the World Parliament is also actually very old. There are some ideas like from the 18th century, some from the 19th century. But technologically speaking, a world parliament could exist already tomorrow, because we as humans can be digitally connected to the global level of governance and politics and democracy. What's missing here is the social world. These, how to say, personal affections and how to say, ideas and belief, because, how to say, statistically seen, most people on planet either identify themselves with their nation states, or they identify themselves with like more regional levels. So I would say maybe like small minority of people, including myself, like see ourselves as, let's say, world or global citizens, which is like maybe 10 and 15% of the whole world population. So the technology already exists today, but what's lacking is the social world and I have to say the social reality in order for a world parliament to function.
I would like to get back to the decentralized nature of the whole initiative. We have seen recently also that different social media companies have tried to block persons, or actually have blocked persons who maybe not represented a certain way of opinion that the leaders of these companies do. But how do you see this? You have talked about decentralization already. So do you think decentralization is pretty much the future? Because definitely there are very strong intents to centralize the world even more and more. And this is what we have been able to see also in the recent past, I think.
Absolutely. So if you speak about the recent past, or even if you go back, let's say 10 years ago, so the last decade started like in 2010. The Arab Spring took place, and there was kind of a general perception, as in Europe, that social media, or let's say Facebook, is good for democracy, because these revolutions, like in Tunisia, in Egypt, in Jordan, they were, I would say, it was easier to organize them by using social media. And then 10 years later, it's the completely opposite. Social media is bad for democracy. Social media is censoring. Social media is used by, let's say, Trump and populists and nationalists. And I would say that the complexity of this problem is, or let's say the issue is the following one, that the research shows that social media is not bad for democracy. I mean, that social media is actually kind of makes it easier for more people to participate in democratic conversation. And it's actually quite simple and obvious. Like if you have a Facebook account, you can actually get in touch with more people. You can write your opinions in your wall. You can get in touch, with different political organizations, parties, networks, and so on. So you can be more involved. Um, and how to say, the bad part is that uh, Facebook, Twitter, similar platforms, they are never gonna be optimal for democracy. They're never gonna be optimal for democratic conversations, decision making, simply because they are profit-driven companies. And this is why I believe that the solution is not only in decentralization, but the solution is, as in the case of CrowdPoll, that I actually want to co-create a system which is going to be non-profit, that's going to function as a public good. Because let's say one reason why democracy was able to function like in the Athenian policy, like in the Athenian city-state, was because the agora was like a public ground. The agora was not owned by some company at that time, or but only by, well, okay, of course, like the Greek citizens, or let's say the Athenian citizens, they were from the wealthier classes, they had privileges, but still it was not like the agora was owned only by only one person or by one group and so on. So I think the solution is really to create something that is it has to be non-profit, because Facebook and Twitter and similar platforms, of course, they're companies, they want to earn money, and this is why they are not created for digitalizing democracy in a more optimal sense.
I mean, I still would like to return to the details of liquid democracy. And you have said that a mobile phone would be enough to live with our rights, with our democratic rights. If we use our phones, you could basically decide about everything, right? So let's say we have a beautiful public garden somewhere in the town, and there are some banks. So we would have the right to decide about the color of the banks, whether the banks should be green, whether they should be red or yellow, whatever.
Mhm.
Do you think government somehow can be excluded in the future, and this really the power of democracy and the power of the people will emerge somehow thanks to this kind of democracy, liquid democracy?
Yes, definitely. So in general, for the start, like when we speak about decentralization, what's meant is like removing the middle hands, the so-called middle hands. Now, let's say, for example, like if we speak about governments, like governments are today middle hands in many ways, like because different institutions and systems. Now, the idea of or one of the ideas of liquid democracy is that, as you say, people can uh, create their own solutions, their own institutions through cooperation, through, let's say, cooperating together, especially on the local level, to really solve everyday problems. So in order to solve these problems, it will, I would say, become easier to do that by having meetings and discussions, and then deciding together how a certain problem or challenge should be dealt with. Because one thing to keep in mind is that representative democracy and the current system of representative governments, it's still a more or less a product of, let's say, industrial society, as large parts of Europe, like in the 19th century, were transforming from agricultural societies to industrial ones. And then you had, let's say, urbanization, cities were growing, and then you had formation of the class society, like, peasants, workers, urban class, and so on, upper class. And then people started feeling that, well, we need to feel represented. I want to feel represented on, let's say, class basis or class interest. Now things are more, how to say, complicated, because class societies as in Europe still exist, but now we have, let's say, different classes, and not only that, you have different kind of technology which enables people to be more peer to peer, person to person, and especially like on the local level, to try to solve problems and challenges by where it doesn't matter if you're, let's say, a liberal or conservative or socialist. Like, in general, people will think that if they see a park that is destroyed, or they feel that they need a school in their municipality or commune, they will try to cooperate and establish create a solution. So I would say definitely that's one of the ideas of liquid democracy, is to even decentralize governance and institutions. I don't think governments are gonna disappear completely. Like, you still need some kind of, let's say, police force and similar judiciary like courts. But I think in some areas, maybe if you speak about labor sector or even transports, some of the institutions could actually be removed, because now they can be organized kind of more locally and decentralized and kind of, let's say, peer to peer. So
you've also mentioned that in Germany, the Pirate Party has been using liquid democracy for years already, and as far as I'm informed, also in some other countries, first of all, pirate parties operate with this kind of democracy. Is there maybe any community, a larger community, let's say in Europe, but if you could tell us maybe some examples from other parts of the world, are there already communities besides now pirate parties using liquid democracy?
to be honest, I'm not familiar at the moment, and I'm reading like more or less every day. I'm reading some article about democracy or liquid democracy or similar. I still not be able to find anything that there is like a town or municipality or commune or a city operating on the basis of liquid democracy. Of course, there are places where, like in Switzerland, where direct democracy is established since earlier and in function. But one thing I'm actually hoping for is that, as my own platform, I mean, CrowdPoll, is getting more developed, and the idea is that CrowdPoll is gonna start functioning now somewhere like I think in May or June this year. So my hope is that some, let's say, local communities like cities or municipalities are going to be interested in using CrowdPoll for their own, inhabitants or residents and so on. And of course I'm hoping that people like across Europe and globally are going to use the platform, because then they can actually start implementing liquid democracy very locally, and this is like, it's gonna be kind of a learning by doing process, or let's say learning by failing and experimentation at the same time, because it's simply gonna take time. It even took time for representative democracy to start functioning before it was implemented more fully. Like in Sweden, the representative democracy became let's say, a reality only more or less 100 years ago, because before that there was kind of like a hybrid system of kind of representative democracy and kind of the older undemocratic structure based on the the king and the royal court and so on. So it's gonna take time, basically.
What I'm also very interested in is who can become a delegate?
Yes, you know how there is this expression that the devil is in the details. Now, for the start, I can only say that in let's say liquid democracies as the general idea, so a delegate can be both an individual and it can be an organization. So it can be, both a politician or an expert or some, NGO activist, or it can just be, let's say, ordinary citizens under quotation marks, who is, let's say, 18 plus, has, the voting age. And a delegate can also be an organization, everything from, let's say, society for environmental protection to a company to, let's say, it could be, for example, even like a school or a municipality, itself. So it really depends how it's organized and which policy area we can speak about. But this is kind of the beauty of decentralization, because if, let's say, uniformity is a synonym for centralization, then diversity is a synonym for decentralization. So it means that in a liquid democracy, you as a delegate, or let's say you as an individual organization, you can have liquid identities. It means basically that, for example, let's say you can be more liberal in certain topics and, let's say, more conservative in other ones. And it means that, let's say, you can be a delegate as an individual, or you can be a member of an organization that is a delegate, itself. So it really depends on the context, on the situation, on which topics is organized. So let's say, for example, that you decide to be a delegate as a member of the, let's say, society for, let's say, Greenpeace, for example. You're a member of Greenpeace and you say, I want to be a delegate in my municipality for environmental questions. And then people locally can give you or delegate their votes to you regarding, nature and environment. At the same time, Greenpeace as an organization, let's say, is a delegate on kind of a more global level, and then they get, votes for, environmental and climate questions at the world level. So this is kind of the structure of the liquid democracy, is that you can kind of be multi-role. You can multiply your identities and your agendas, really kind of depending on the situation and the context that's being discussed. So, but as a general answer to your question, so a delegate can be both an individual and an organization. Then, of course, right now I don't have the answer, like if you speak more about, age limit, or if you should be able to be a delegate if you're, sitting in prison, things like that. But those are the details that can be agreed upon on a later stage. The idea with crowd polling is, the starting point is that when you create an account, you can choose directly, are you acting as an individual or are you acting as an organization? So you can, even if you have one account, you can still choose how you want to act depending on, on the interest and on the topic.
And those who are promoting liquid democracy, they relate pretty much representative democracy to campaign spending and also to political lies that are basically sold as products in a campaign, political campaign, and it turns out that later they are not even accountable. Politicians are not even accountable for their lies. So this would look completely different in liquid democracy. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And here I have to start to speak a little bit about the human nature. So today, I mean, during the recent years, you have probably seen statements like, post-truth politics and, Brexit and Trump and populism. and lies. But here's the thing: it's not I'm approving that I'm completely against such behaviors. But here's the thing: at the same time, we as humans, in our let's say basic nature, we are very rational. We when we say that we think something, we say that usually what we mean is that we feel something, and also we are we are acting more through stories and myths, not through facts and rationality. And this is why democracy is not about voting, what's true and what is a lie. Democracy, I would say, more kind of in a generalized, more simplified, how to say, explanation. I would say democracy is more like voting what is less a lie and what is more of a lie, or what is, let's say, less true or more true, because science and facts and expertise, they're part of the democracy or democratic conversations. But at the same time, most people, when they go to the voting poll, they don't vote how they think, they vote how they feel about something. So now the case of the liquid democracy, is the following: it can mobilize, more knowledge. It can involve more people, especially people with some kind of expertise and knowledge, to participate and to have to say debate and discuss and make decisions. It can also involve more people in general, regardless if you're expert or not. And another function that is important is that not only that you can delegate your vote, but you can also take it back. You can actually have to say you can remove your vote from the delegate, let's say an individual organization, that for some reason you don't like this person, organization anymore. Let's say now, for example, in the current system, let's say you vote for a politician, and then after elections, this politician maybe ends up, being a racist or a pedophile, or this politician is breaking, his or hers or its electoral promises. Now, in the representative system, you just have to wait for, the next elections. You have to wait for 3, 4, 5 years. In the liquid system, you can say that, okay, this person was a liar, or this person didn't kept up to the political promise. I would actually remove my vote. I will give it to somebody else.
So you could do that immediately, right?
Immediately, yeah. And I have to say here that I cannot say that liquid democracy is going to be a perfect system. Even in a liquid democracy, there are going to be problems. There are going to be failures. There are going to be dirty political games and things like that. But at least things will become more transparent. They will become more clear, and they will provide individuals with the opportunity to decide: do I still want to trust this person, organization, or do I want to have to say punish them for their misbehavior?
What I'm still asking myself is, if you have an organization, if you're registered as a delegate, being an organization, you could still buy votes or likes, just like it happens in reality as well. So even in a liquid democracy, you have just mentioned it, it wouldn't be a perfect system, but it would be definitely more transparent than the current one. But on the other hand, as one of the flaws, I think, would be that in such a system also you could buy votes. Do I see it well, or is there already maybe a solution for that?
Yes, there are solutions. So to start saying that, the thing is, there are of course such risks and problems. Even today, if you look, let's say, on the representative democracy, I wrote an article 2 weeks ago in the Swedish media that the current system with, let's say, the public, how you call them, like there is So all political parties in the Swedish parliament, they actually they receive most of their finances. They receive from the public, from the national budget. So because there is amount of money every year that is given from the budget to political parties. Now, I would say most people, as in Sweden, they think this is a good system, because then the parties are not getting money from, companies or, businesses. But the problem is that when you have, taxpayers' money, given to political parties, is that political parties, they are becoming less dependent on their members, because, as long as you're the parliament, you get some money. As long as you can, get some votes by promising things, even things you cannot deliver, you will be in the parliament and you will get, public money. Now, if you speak more about liquid democracy and more specifically about crowd poll, like, me and my colleagues are having those discussions how to prevent, these kinds of behavior, vote buying and similar. But also, like, the general idea, in my opinion, should be that liquid democracy, it can function more optimally in a society where there is let's say, some level of basic equality, so that, let's say, you have like a, basic income system, or where nobody has to be, poor or homeless, because then everybody has some kind of decent, minimum level of equality. And I would say, if you speak here more about, buying votes in the system that I want to create, so every organization who is a delegate will have, certain transactions with their supporters and contributors and patrons. Now, I cannot, let's say, prevent a delegate from receiving, I don't know, 20 euro or 50 euro support from other people, but at least it can be transparent, especially, like who contributed money to this delegate, like which organization. Is it a business organization? Is it a eco, like environmental lobby organization? Is it an NGO? So then, let's say, others can see, who is actually supporting this delegate. And of course, a simple solution to, voting fraud or, buying of votes is basically to say, okay, the maximum amount of money a delegate can receive is that, let's say, I don't know, like 20, 30 euros. So it means that you cannot give 1,000 euros or like, 1 million euros to this delegate. So that's also a way to solve, this issue. But as I say, I personally think that in order for liquid democracy to become, let's say, mainstream and established, there has to be some kind of basic equality, like, everybody has access to, let's say, healthcare and has enough money, to buy food and transport and accommodation and so on. I mean, to pay for that.
You have already mentioned that liquid democracy is being applied by several political parties, and it has been here for almost 50 years, from the late 60s, actually. What do you think? How long do we have to wait until larger communities also apply this type of system?
It's a very tough question. I'm afraid I cannot kind of give a number. I cannot really say that, like, in 2040 or in 2050, let's say, Sweden will have liquid democracy as a, as a political nation, as a, big community, or that Hungary will have it, or I don't know, Uganda or Chile, doesn't matter. So it's very hard for me to say when. What I can say on how to say regarding that is that it will depend very much on formation of communities on very, let's say, private and local levels. Because let's say, I don't know, like, for example, now in let's say that in 10 years that there are like 50,000 communities in Sweden, if you speak about everything from networks, societies, associations, if there are like 50,000 of them, using liquid democracy, then of course the chances are higher that liquid democracy will be applied on the country level as well faster than if there is like 3,000 communities using or let's say applying to liquid democracy. So it really depends on how the bottom up, how the how to say this kind of development from local to global level is going to be developed, because liquid democracy is really something that has to start very locally. It has to start like from NGOs and municipalities, then up to higher levels of decision making and governance. And it's actually the similar case as it was with representative democracy, because some kind of representative democracy like existed, for example, in Protestant churches and similar, or in villages like in the 17th, 18th century, but it really took time before it was applied on national levels, like in the 19th and 20th centuries. So it's hard for me to put a number. I can only say that things are gonna go faster as long as the numbers of different communities, associations that are using liquid democracy are increasing, constantly.
And most probably digitalization will also not hinder the spreading of liquid democracy in the upcoming years.
Exactly, because liquid democracy and decentralization are, I would say, two sides of the same coin. Liquid democracy without decentralization is completely impossible, because then it's not liquid and and local or decentralized, then it's the opposite, centralized democracy. So
Great. Vladan, thank you very much for these very interesting thoughts, and I'm very glad we had the opportunity to interview you, and I wish you all the best to Stockholm, Sweden, and I hope you can advance quickly with your idea of liquid democracy, and I wish you all the best.
thank you very much, and once more, I'm thankful to everyone who has been listening to this episode, and thank you to you and your colleagues for inviting me to this session. So